out on the range today, so please bear with gunfire you hear in the background. And today I'm doing something I was hoping to avoid, which is Taurus Judge Revolver Part 4. I'm going to do this in conjunction with Gunfight Statistics Part 2, and how those fit together will hopefully make sense in a few minutes. Now to start with, we've done 3 presentations on the Taurus Judge Revolver, but since then some people have contacted me asking to see the meat target shot with a couple of different types of 410 handgun multi-projectile rounds. So what I've got is the Federal Premium 410 handgun, and I've got 410 3-inch Magnum with 9 pellets of number 4 buckshot, and 410 3-inch Magnum with 5 pellets of triple-aught buck, and both of these are copper-plated buckshot. So we'll shoot the meat target with both of those out of the Taurus Judge, and just as a basis of comparison, I'll also shoot a meat target with my Ruger Security 6 357 Magnum, which is loaded with Remington green and white box 357 Magnum 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. Some people will consider this an unfair comparison because this has a 4-inch barrel and this has a 3-inch barrel. But to me, I think it's a fair comparison because the overall dimensions of these guns are pretty similar. So without further ado, let's shoot some meat targets. Please forgive the redundancy, but the meat target is leather jacket skin, followed by pork steak pectorals, pork ribs, a watermelon to simulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, 4 layers of t-shirt on the front, 4 layers on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. And I'm going to shoot from 7 yards with the Taurus Judge Revolver, and we'll start with the 3-inch Magnum with 9 pellets and number 4 buckshot. And while we're talking about statistics, remember we're going to shoot at 7 yards because the FBI has spent decades telling us that 7 yards is the mean distance for a lethal confrontation. I fired 2 shots, and that's a total of 18 pellets. However, only about 4 of them actually hit the meat target. So what that tells us is our pattern is fairly big, and although that might increase your hit probability in that sense, it's lowering the number of pellets that are actually hitting the intended target. And as far as the effectiveness of those, a couple of the pellets were stopped by the ribs on the front of the target. A couple of them went through, but with minimal damage, and those 2 that went through were stuck in the watermelon and caused almost no damage, and none of the pellets actually made it through to the ribs on the back of the target. So this number 4 buckshot does not look all that effective. Let's move up to the triple-aught buck and see how we do. Interesting results with our triple-aught buck. As where with our number 4 buck we had so much pattern entropy that it became a detriment as far as number of hits on target, with the triple-aught we see an almost opposite effect. Now here's our pork steak pectoral, and you can see that on one of those shots the 5 pellets are in a pattern that has a diameter of about 1.5 inches. There's almost no pattern entropy. So as far as the idea that the multiple projectile round will enhance your hit probability in the sense that you'll hit the target with at least something, that may be true with some types of ammunition, but with our 5 pellets of triple-aught, there's very little effect in that sense. Now in terms of the effectiveness on the target, we see that in our ribs on the front of the target, again, one of the shots has all the pellets in a very tight pattern, and where the pellets hit the ribs broke them. A lot of damage to our watermelon lung tissue, and as far as penetration, a couple of the pellets were actually in the watermelon. Several of them were stopped by the plastic wrap around the ribs on the back. Some of them were stopped in the ribs, and only 2 of the 10 pellets actually penetrated the ribs and were stopped by the t-shirt on the back of the target. Now let me show you a close-up of those projectiles. And here's some of the pellets I recovered, and although some of these are disc-shaped now, they were all spherical when they started. So the 5 pellets of triple-aught buck seemed fairly effective when fired from the Taurus Judge, but how is that going to compare to our 357 Magnum with a 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point? So how'd we do with our 357? Well, here's one entrance hole in the ribs on the front of the target, and arguably this one projectile did more damage than all 5 of the triple-aught buck projectiles from the Taurus Judge. There's extensive damage to our watermelon lung tissue, and as far as the ribs on the back, one of the bullets was stopped by the ribs on the back, and the other one did penetrate but had almost no energy left. Now let me show you a close-up of these projectiles. And here's our 2 357 Magnum projectiles, and you can see that both of them have mushroomed extensively. So what does the meat target demonstration tell us? Well, first and foremost, it tells us that when it comes to your Taurus Judge revolver, ammunition selection is of paramount importance. You may have seen in some of the previous Taurus Judge presentations that I've done, I've shot several different types of ammo, some of which just did not live up to the hype. Also, in my subjective view of the meat target demonstration, it looked like the .357 Magnum was more effective than our Taurus Judge loaded with the triple-aught buck. And here's the part where I have to mention that although I think I have enough scientific integrity to leave my biases out of such things, there's no question that I do not like the Taurus Judge revolver. That doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong, it just means that it's wrong for me. I'm sure that for some people in some situations the Taurus Judge would be perfect, and no one can judge what's right for you except you. But there are a few reasons that I dislike it. One of those is that anything I've ever tried to accomplish with a Taurus Judge, I've been able to accomplish more efficiently with a more conventional revolver. Another reason, and you may have heard me use this term before, is something I call legendary status. It never ceases to amaze me the capabilities people attribute to this revolver that it just doesn't have. And here's where I have to talk a little bit about gunfight statistics. Recently, someone published a video on YouTube about gunfight statistics, specifically about a study that was done over a period of 10 years that looked at over 1,700 different defensive shootings, some police shootings, some military shootings, and they came to a bunch of conclusions. One of those conclusions was that shotguns are more effective than handguns. That's not exactly an earth-shattering revelation. But recently someone commented on one of the previous Taurus Judge presentations that I've done, and he wanted to tell me how stupid I was and how wrong I was, and tell me that the Taurus Judge was far more effective than conventional handguns because when loaded with triple-aught buck, it will behave more like a shotgun than a handgun, and this study clearly showed that shotguns were more effective than handguns. That makes sense until you actually watch that YouTube video where the narrator very clearly says that this study, quote, did not gather data on .410 handgun shootings, close quote. So he's using it to illustrate a point when they explicitly say that the Taurus Judge was not part of the study. But that makes me think, we always compare the Taurus Judge to conventional handguns. If we compared the Taurus Judge revolver to what would be considered a typical shotgun, how would it stack up? Let's see if we can put that to the test. Now we'll start with the chronograph. Normally I do chronograph testing from a distance of 7 yards, but when I'm using multiple projectile rounds I condense that distance to 4 yards. And we'll start with the Federal Premium .410 handgun, which is .410 3-inch 5 pellets of triple-aught buck. $754. 718. 737. 712. And 712. Now let's see how that compares to a more conventional shotgun. Now let's try a conventional shotgun, and what I would consider pretty conventional is this Mossberg Model 500 12 gauge. And I have it loaded with Remington green and yellow box 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch double-aught buck 9 pellet, which I would consider pretty much the archetype of shotgun defensive rounds. Let's see what kind of velocities we get with this. 1317. 1308. 1321, 1279, and 1292. Now let's go crunch the numbers. Well, in shooting the Taurus Judge revolver, you may notice that with the last two shots I had the same velocity. That's indicative of an error. So I threw one of those out and off camera fired one more shot with a velocity of 751. So taking that into account, I crunched the numbers and got a mean velocity of 734 feet per second. While by comparison with the 12 gauge, we got a mean velocity of 1,303. That's 569 feet per second more. I'd say that's a lot more. Now this comparison might seem unfair and downright ridiculous, but remember someone was using the 1,700 shooting study to justify their position on the Taurus Judge revolver. And in that study, they took into account a lot of different shotguns, and since the 12 gauge is by far the most common, we must infer that the 12 gauge was by far the most common in those shootings. So it makes this comparison more fair, although probably still ridiculous. But even though the velocity seems to be a lot more, these are still just numbers. How will our 12 gauge perform when shooting the meat target? Let's put that to the test. So let's shoot the meat target from 7 yards with our 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch double-aught buck 9 pellet. And because so far I've shot the meat target with 2 rounds of everything else, I'll shoot it with 2 rounds of 12 gauge. So how'd we do? Well, here's the ribs on the back of the target, and where the pellets hit the ribs broke them. You could arguably say that the 12 gauge did more damage to the ribs on the back of the target than the Taurus Judge did to the ribs on the front of the target. And this piece right here, I found this 12 feet from ground zero. So what's the takeaway from all of this? Well, people wanted to see the meat target shot with multiple projectile rounds out of the Taurus Judge, and we accomplished that. And to reiterate, we also saw that for your Taurus Judge, ammunition selection is of paramount importance. And we saw that with the right ammunition selection, the Judge can be effective. Is it as effective as more conventional revolvers? In my opinion, no. We also see that it does not compare favorably with a 12 gauge shotgun, which yes, seems ridiculous, but even if this had been a 20 gauge or a 410 bore shotgun with a full-length barrel, the Taurus Judge still would have come up short. And that brings me to the subject of this study of 1,700 plus shootings. There's 2 things I want to say about that. One, because it's a study of real-world occurrences and it's not empirical experimentations done under controlled conditions, it's going to be wrought with extraneous variables. Another thing is, you have to watch out for the people who will use a study to illustrate points that it does not illustrate. And you have to keep that in mind when somebody says to you something like, "This story and others like it prove the existence of animal ghosts." I have so far not had the time to do an in-depth analysis of that study, and hopefully in the near future I'll be able to do that, and that'll result in one of those presentations where I just sit here and talk for 20 minutes. So until then, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching Taurus Judge Revolver Part 4 and Gunfight Statistics Part 2.